It's great to finally be on a stage at PAFOW. It's been something I've been longing to do for many years. So Matthew Mee, I work for Emsi in the UK. Great to be here. And Al, sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not actually going to talk a lot about our technology. We're a labour market intelligence business. We've been doing that for 20 years. It's all we do. We've been doing it in the UK for the last 7 years. We have over 1,000 customers across the globe, so we're doing something right. But I actually thought I'd take this opportunity on stage to talk a little bit about the theme for this conference was people analytics for good. And I'm sure many of you have seen and read Dave Ulrich's book on Outside In, and I thought there's an opportunity here with professionals in this space to connect the dots and perhaps think about the future. So that's what I'm going to try and do for 15 minutes. So I asked myself this question first. Can you imagine me sitting at home going, why am I asking myself this question? This is a bad idea. But actually, if you think about the journey that we're on, you know, the evolution of people analytics, in particular over the last 5 or 6 years, accelerated in the last 3, has been immense, and that pace of change continues. But actually, a lot of what we're doing is very focused on our own organisations, and I'm going to ask the question, is that it? Is that really what we're here to do? Is it just about solving business problems and creating competitive advantage? Or do we have an aspiration and an ambition as a profession to do something bigger? So here's where I started. So if you think about what it is we're doing today, first of all, we're using lots of data to look at individuals, how we hire people better, how we develop their careers better, how we get individual performance and engagement, how we move all the needles on these important things within business. Then, of course, we're helping teams. So how do we empower teams? You know, there's been a lot of talk about nudges over the course of the last 24 hours, but how do we empower managers to change behaviours amongst teams so that we're greater than ourselves, back to kind of the old Gestalt psychology world. And then, of course, we're trying to solve business problems, right? We're trying to ultimately deliver stakeholder value, solve business problems, and make our organisations greater profits, more dollars, better customer satisfaction. Does that resonate with people? So improved workforce experience, really important, employee experience, and of course, improved return on human capital investment. You know, that's ultimately what HR are measured by, is are we getting a better return for our investment and the dollars we spend on people? But then I asked this question, what about communities? What about society? What about some of the bigger problems we're facing? You know, look down the road at the protests that are going on right in front of our very eyes. Isn't that really important too? And collectively, if you think of the organisations and workforces that we represent, isn't there a bigger opportunity ahead? My conclusion was yes. And so what I thought I'd try and do today is look 5 years ahead and say, what are the things that we might want to think about that we could influence now, that we could really set a path for the future? Does that sound okay? Yeah? I'm just going to stand a bit over here so I can see my slides a little bit better. So what I've actually done here is I've taken a few scenarios thinking about this in the shower and various places, going, what is it that I think would be useful to talk about? And I'm going to start with education. I can say that because at Emsi we do a lot of work in the education sector, working with colleges and universities, helping them design curriculum. But actually, look at all the data that you guys are all collecting on the skills that you need in your workforces. Look at all the data you're collecting on the courses that people have done, you know, the universities they've been to, the apprenticeships they're going through, the training courses they've been on, and ask the question, are we actually learning anything here? Are we feeding back what we know is the skills of people coming into the workforce, and are we feeding that back into the education system so that education gets materially better? I suspect we're not doing as good a job of that as we could. And I think if we were to collectively aggregate some of our insights across different industries, different occupations, different job groups, we could do a much better job of telling educators what we need to equip people with when they go into the workforce. I'm going to give you some data, because we're at a data conference. So this is some of our own data. This is UK job postings data over the last 12 months, 9.6 million UK jobs. Here are the the hard skills and the soft skills in most demand based on job postings. I always caveat job postings with, this is a sample of the employment market, it's not the full employment market, but it's a pretty big sample, right? The question I ask myself, and I'd ask you to ask yourselves, is how well are we equipping people with these skills when they leave education, be it that they go into employment after school or after university? So management, communication skills, sales and negotiation skills. In the soft skills category, and finance skills, so we're HR professionals, what's the one theme that always comes up when you talk to HR where we're not as good as we should be? Yeah, finance skills, business acumen. And then in soft skills, learning. Are we teaching people actually how to learn and how to become better individual learners in the education system? Are we teaching people how to manage projects? Are we teaching people how to listen? My thought looking at this data and we've got a huge opportunity with the data we have in this room and in your organisations to help, one, inform are these the right things, but two, actually educate education to do their jobs better. So that's my first point. I've got a bit of a soapbox. Okay. The second thing I thought about was what I've called holistic measures. So should we introduce an outside-in mindset to better understand the impact that we have? And I'll explain what I mean by this. So HCMI are downstairs, who launched the Human Capital Metrics Handbook. How many of you have a copy of that out of interest? nearly 700 HR metrics defined in one book. It's an online survey now, but how many of you have seen the ISO from TC260, the ISO 3400, new standards on human capital management? Quick hands, show of hands. Anyone seen this? So if you haven't, these are standards set by ISO on how HR should manage workforces. So this is information that we should all have. But actually, that's just about HR. Again, it's back to within our organisation. Have any of you seen the OECD wellbeing report? No? What about the World Happiness Index? So I lived in the Middle East for 9 years. We actually had a state minister for happiness. Right? How cool is that? That you have someone in charge of happiness of a nation. I think that's quite forward-thinking. But what I started to think about, so there's an initiative bringing this kind of back home. In the UK, economies and countries have now recognised that measuring GDP per capita isn't actually the most important thing to do. It doesn't actually give you a sense check of how good a society is. And so there's an initiative called Beyond GDP. It was rolled out in 2018. It's OECD and ONS. This is some data that actually is public in the UK domain on the well-being of the nation of the UK. How interesting is this? We're measuring things like real household disposable income, net disposable income per head. So these are measures that the government are interested in. Do you think there's some resonance here with some of the things that we're measuring? I love the sentiment here as well. They actually measure low levels of satisfaction, of life satisfaction, low level, rather than levels of happiness. It's phrased in the negative, right? So how would we think of all the data we're collecting on engagement and well-being and the workforce? Isn't there a link here between what's happening at a national level and what we're doing in our organisations? There's a bridge there. There's an opportunity, was my sentiment. And then outside in, inside out, I looked at actually some things like, are we actually measuring things like employee debt? Isn't that important in your workforce? Are we measuring things like disposable income, anxiety levels, life satisfaction? Because nations are now saying these things are important to our society. There's so much similarity with what countries are realising and what we are actually doing. So what role could we play in helping this journey? And it doesn't just stop at the UK. Does anyone recognise this chart? Yeah? Okay, a couple of hands, a few hands, thank you. So this is 2015, the United Nations rolled out a 2030 plan to change the world, to end poverty. Look at number 3, good health and well-being. Look at gender equality. Look at decent work and economic growth. There's so much similarity with what, at an international level, governments are saying are important that converges with the work we're doing. And so that was, for me, our ambition should be huge, could be huge. One other point just on this slide was, If you think about what's important to millennials and the youth of today when they're choosing the employers they want to go and work for, how much of this resonates? So think of your employer brands and the things you could be measuring within your people analytics functions that go beyond just measures around work and workforce. I'll move on slightly, and I'm going to skim through a couple of these, but economic impact. I realised that it was 29 years ago that I did my economics A-level, which is a terrifying thought in itself. But does everyone remember the multiplier? Yeah? So actually, when we're thinking about automation of jobs, the Deloitte session yesterday, several other sessions throughout this conference talk about, we know change is happening in the workforce. Organisation design isn't just about what goes on within your organisation. It's what the impact and the ripple effect that has around your wider communities and your wider economies. And that's really important for us to be aware of and to measure when we're driving organisational change. We've seen what happened in the UK, mining industry, shipping industry, manufacturing. It isn't just about business, it's about communities and local microeconomies. And that is critical to our future. And we go beyond that, just economics slightly. How many of you are part of the WDI, Workforce Disclosure Initiative? I know a number of you will be. How many of you have heard of it? A few. So this is, a brilliant scheme run by Share Action. This is about ethical practice, not just within your organisation, but right the way through the supply chain, through your manufacturing process. Have we got ethical workforce practices going on across the world? Do we know about it? Can we consciously say we're doing things in the right way? Because that doesn't just affect economies here, it affects people right across the world. Huge opportunity. And this links to, so don't we have a bigger opportunity around corporate social responsibility and environmental impact, things that are really important to young people, the future of the world? Isn't this something that we should be measuring holistically? And bringing this, again, slightly closer to home, the UK labour market down at Westminster, everyone will say in the corridors of power, everything's fine. Look at employment, look at unemployment, everything's good. But actually, if any of you have seen some of Kevin Green's talks, the former CEO of the REC, what we've actually got, we've got the UK economy at almost full employment. We've got labour, skills and talent shortages, and they're all different things, by the way. So recommend, have a look at his podcast. But what we've actually got happening when you look at the economy is polarisation of wealth. So when you look at your workforces and your employees, can they afford mortgages? Can they buy homes for their families? Can they afford to buy healthy food? Can they afford to have a gym membership? I'm not a socialist, by the way, but these things are really important for society. So wealth is being polarised, and this actually comes from the ONS, so back to Beyond GDP. I've never met Glenn Everett, I don't know if he's in the room, but despite high levels of employment, rising incomes and spending across UK households, people are not reporting increases in their well-being. This may be due to worries about rising debt repayments, which could be driving concerns about their future financial situation. The country is recognising we have a problem. We have the data that I think could help. The last thing I'm going to talk about is around, again, back to automation. Has everyone seen the Job Quality Index that CIPD, I used to work at CIPD, so know this well, published last year? This is about our responsibility when we design new jobs, not just saying, the Deloitte presentation was great yesterday of saying, look, let's look at a task level at how we can automate, because if we can automate tasks, then we can just create new jobs. But I think we have an opportunity to be responsible employers and actually put a minimum standard around the design of good work. There are some really good opportunities here to say, let's have a minimum standard. A job should be good for the humans who are doing it, good for society. Just last question. We think about our economies. Last 10 years, what do you think has been the fastest growing job in the UK over the last 10 years? Anyone care to shout out? Anyone? Second place? No? I'll show you. Carers and home care workers, 136,000 more jobs. And if you look along this scale, programmers number 2, and you see very high percentage growth. But if you look at if you look across these jobs, one of the things it really flags to me is, are we creating good work? Are the jobs that we're building in our economy aligned to, and I'll say in quotes, an industrial strategy? Are they the right jobs for the future? So I think we've got an opportunity through this forum to really connect the dots, elevate, and how do we make a difference on a higher plane than just our own organisations? How do we think about education? How do we think about good work? How do we think about economic impact? How do we think about society as a whole? And I really hope that the co-collaboration that there is in this community work together to define this agenda and do something really amazing. The reason I joined Emsi is because we work with education, we work with government, we work with employers. So that's the opportunity, do that in local areas and join up the dots. I hope that's been insightful. Thanks very much for your time.